You're listening to the Valley Current.
This is going to be a great podcast. You're going to tell me everything that's going right and wrong in San Francisco.
Oh my God. I had a client that came in and she's very liberal, very bright, well-educated, master's, maybe PhD, but works in business. Very, very, very bright person. And she comes in up in arms about DeSantis just passing this law about this 15-and-a-half-week limit for women to have an abortion. And she was like, I can't believe he's doing this. Like, what a barbarian, and blah, 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 blah. I just had read this article like a couple months ago in the New York Times, and the New York Times had printed a map of the world, and the entire continent of Europe, you saw it, limits abortion to 15 weeks with all these caveats. And in Germany, abortion is completely illegal except for like under the table, they still do it, but it's like illegal.
Well, if the mother's life is in danger is a typical exception.
Okay,
That exception exists in the Florida legislation as well.
Yeah, and then so also if when you're 15-and-a-half weeks pregnant, like you're really pregnant. You know what I mean? You've had 50 kids.
You're at the point that people would say there's some likelihood of viability, right?
Right, exactly.
I mean, the original Justice Blackmun decision in Roe versus Wade divided the trimesters into trimesters, 13 weeks, 13 weeks, 13 weeks, and said the first 13 weeks abortions are presumptively valid. Next 13 weeks, there's a gray area, the judgment call the doctor makes in consultation with the patient. It's still sort of, the way to read it is, it's still a woman's body more than it is a separate soul or a separate being. But that last 13 weeks, I think even Justice Blackmun was like, hey, that may be too far. That might be too late. So what they're doing now, like literally 30 plus years after that decision, is they're trying to legislatively put some sort of time frame around what typically would be the patient-doctor privilege to decide. And, the kicker to that story, the New York Times story you're bringing up, is the follow-on story the next day that said, look, there's going to be a day after, or there is a day after abortion pill that people can buy. Yeah. It's not hard to get. It's like Viagra. You can get it from Canada without paying for a doctor's prescription if you really want it. And if you don't want to go to the doctor about it. Now there's even doctors that'll do this stuff online. Not that I know, because I don't use that stuff, but just generally, that basically you can get all this stuff and you can carry it in your wallet if you want to, right?
Right.
So it's becoming more convenient, right?
So anyway, so my client, which I thought was really interesting because I respect her, I know her. No.
She wasn't pregnant.
No, and she wasn't pregnant. She's not going to have kids, and she's beyond that stage in life. But she, I sent her the New York Times article, and she wrote me back and she said, my mind is blown. I can't even believe I didn't know that.
Yeah.
And then she goes, it's just, and then she said, you know what, Melissa, I just feel like this is all so political. Everyone, it's just about politics.
It's a very newsworthy item because it runs up against this whole question of what does it mean for a woman to have rights in a paternalistic, male-dominated society that historically has sort of set rules that didn't give a crap about what a woman feels or wants. I mean, the voting rights took a special amendment to the Constitution. I mean, there's so many examples of that history. But the point is that now the states are separately dividing in a way that says, look, if you don't like California, like you don't like wildfires, you don't like people living on the streets, you don't like poverty, you don't like crazy taxes compared to the rest of the United States, California and New York are the highest states, and they have the most poverty, if you ask me, street people living on the street in tents all over the place. And now they're talking about like putting them up in hotels. Like, really? Okay.
Oh, God.
Yeah, no, that's why I sent you that article, because it seems like the brilliance of the American system is there's 50 different, you can almost call them 50 countries, not countries the way France is different from Italy, but there's 50 different sovereigns, different states, and they can decide a lot of things separately from the federal government. And unless the Constitution says they can't, they can set like the various rules of the road. You can only go 40 miles an hour in this area. The federal government has a highway system that I guess is 65 or 55. They keep changing it. That's the federal system, but state roads, it could be 30 miles an hour. It could be 15 miles an hour. And the federal government doesn't get to change that. You have to get the legislature in the state to say that's too slow or that's too fast, or the county or somebody that's much more local. And the view is, if you don't like the local approach, move to Wyoming. There's lots of roads that have no mileage limit at all. It's like the Autobahn. You want to kill yourself on the road, you want to go 200 miles an hour, go do it in Wyoming, but you have to live in Wyoming. You got to deal with the Wyoming weather and so on. And there are lots of people that do that. They buy big ranches in Wyoming and they live in Wyoming. I mean, Wyoming's got like 500,000 total people in the whole state.
I know, it's a huge state. I love Florida. I think it's a great place. You know, it's interesting because just what we were talking about before, how San Francisco, because San Francisco is where I live. I mean, I live in Oakland, but San Francisco is where I lived for 25 years.
Plus your practice has been, your practice has been.
Yeah, I mean, I'm in my office right now. I'm in my office right now, and what has been going on here in the city is, I mean, next level crazy. And I feel like I have become obsessed with, since the pandemic and seeing what's been going on in this state and in the cities, it's mind-boggling to watch with a compassionate heart people living in open air drug markets. You cannot call it a homeless encampment. That's like bad marketing. Like that's like makes it sound like they're like camping in Golden Gate Park. Like it's a it's a drug, open air drug market with prostitution, trafficking, gangs, crime. I mean, like William, did you listen to this I sent you with William and the BART?
Yeah. Yep.
So,
I mean, that's what I wanted. That's what I wanted to talk about today, because we see images like the ones that I'm going to put up on the screen, and we sort of disbelieve it. But I remember walking to your office from a couple of miles away, and I mean your new office that's off Union Square, I think you are now.
Yeah.
And I remember I somehow ended up parking the car like 5 blocks away, so I was like walking through the Tenderloin.
Oh, like the Tenderloin.
Yeah. And so, you know, you get the flavor from these pictures that I'm putting up.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, I just searched on Google images, San Francisco homelessness, and it's the same story, which is these encampments continue to get bigger and bigger. I mean, they just seem to be getting
that's from
bigger.
2017. That's Los Angeles.
Do you
know that there's
a bunch in San Francisco too? Like here's San Francisco, right? Thousands remain homeless within an earshot of the Civic Building, right?
Oh yeah. Oh no, there's something called the Linkage Center now that's right in UN Plaza, right by the courts.
Yeah.
So they opened this thing called the Linkage Center. So you can go there and you can shoot up. You can sit in there in like little cubbies and shoot up, and do drugs, smoke fentanyl, whatever. And then if
So
you happen to OD,
we've got a version of Amsterdam that's sort of going on in San Francisco, right?
Yes, exactly. And so, so anyway, I read this book. It's called San Francisco. Have you heard about it?
Yeah. I've read it. Yep.
Yeah, and that's the guy that I told you I wanted you to interview, Michael Schellenberger. He's running for governor.
Okay.
And he did a case study. He went in the Netherlands to Amsterdam and worked with the public health people over there and talked to them about, how they were dealing with it and what they were doing. And he tells this story where he's like, people are living on the street, and in Amsterdam, they would go up to the guy and say, hey, do you want treatment? Do you want, you can't live on the street. You can't live in a tent, right? We can put you in a shelter. We can shelter you. We can put you in drug treatment. We can put you in the jail. Like, you cannot sit out in society and shoot up drugs and smoke drugs and do all this stuff with people walking around. Like, a civilized society would not allow that. That's not acceptable. And they also had mental health. So, they were kind of flabbergasted at the fact that I don't even know. I mean, you probably know more about this with the law. There's something about the way that California has been approaching this homeless crisis is because of affordability, and that prices are too high, and then we need more affordable housing. And so what I think I don't think what we see on the street has anything to do with housing. I think it's a combination of mental health and drug addiction and magnet for people to come here because we offer all these services. And
that's the big differential, which is basically there's an attraction of going to a place that has decent weather most of the year. That has lax policies, which you could say are motivated by a very liberal administration in the city and the county and the state, and where the police are no longer really enforcing the drug laws, at least from a usage point of view. And so you get this Michael Schellenberger kind of analysis of San Francisco, because it's sort of like a statement of, this is where we're at. I found the screen, which is his book references this kind of picture, which is tents along the streets, like this is tent city. And I have to tell you, most of my friends that visit San Francisco are shocked that these luxury hotels are charging $1,000 a night, but literally a block or two from the hotel is this encampment that smells like sewage, which it is. And it's a health, it really is a health risk for someone to sort of step in the wrong area of town. And obviously there's been a lot. I mean, I had two different cars I drove to San Francisco, and both of them had their windows broken. I had one that had the window broken. I took another one and thought, okay, that was just a fluke. It's window broken. And then the people I talked to are like, well, why are you driving? I said, because usually that's what people do when they have a car. And they said, no, you have to take an Uber. I said, well, an Uber from Palo Alto is like $70. I have a car. Why do I have a car? Well, that's right. That's a good question. Why do you have a car? They're like criticizing me for taking a car into San Francisco. And I'm like, wow, what is that? Well, the Uber drivers have to make money too. Okay, fine. So that's what I started doing. I started taking Uber. I used to take the Caltrain even when I lived in San Francisco. And I always thought that was an interesting mess in many ways, because I think there's danger on public transit. There is real danger on public transit, unless you carry a gun, which I don't, or some other weapon, which is what I thought of when I saw your son's thing, which is it's almost like you have to have a weapon. You almost have to be able to defend yourself, right?
And you know what's really interesting is that this is what I feel really passionate about, is that I'm raising a child, and then we chose to send him to school in San Francisco,
Right.
before the pandemic. So it seemed like he could take the BART from Rockbridge, and then he could go into the city, and then he could, commute with my husband. And then, and he loves the city, and it's only, it's really not that far. It's like a 25-minute BART ride. It's
Right.
not that big of a deal. And it was a great school, and, it was a good opportunity. But then the pandemic hit, and then, he's going into town, but like there's not a bunch of commuters going into town. So he's on with a bunch of people that, are just like loitering on BART and like doing drugs on BART and hanging out on BART. And, and then it was like very few people. So it felt like less safe. And he kind of has created this persona in his personality that he's kind of like a tough kid now. Like he's had
your
to
son
create
is?
this.
Your son's a tough kid now?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yes.
Okay.
Like it's actually I think it's because of necessity. He gets picked on and he's gotten pushed down the stairs at Powell. He's had his backpack, someone tried stealing his backpack. He's had his phone stolen. He's been punched and spit on. He'll fight back. Like he's a big, he's kind of a strong kid, and he's a little bit like, he's built up a little, he's a surfer, and he's got like strong muscles. Yeah. And, but he kind of walks around like, and I have to keep telling him like, we're at home now. Like, you don't have to act like that,
I actually think if you have a teenager, I think three things that, like, my kids are too old to express
Right.
these lessons to them, but I think you could do it. Number one, I think you do have to let him or her take some self-defense lessons, karate, jujitsu, whatever it is, the Japanese style.
Yeah.
That says, look, the goal is not to kill the other person, but to dismantle them, disarm them. I would spend the $5,000 over whatever period that is, a year, 6 months. Number two, I do think that anyone that travels on BART or Caltrain or buses or whatever you travel on, I think you do have to carry pepper spray or mace or whatever formulation that fits your wallet. Yeah. And I think you have to be ready to use it in a self-defensive way. And you just can't be bullied. I mean, I know people say that's crazy. Give up your wallet, give up this, give up that.
Yeah. No.
That's just bullshit to my way of thinking. I mean, I really do think that's bullshit. And then number three, I do think you have to build an awareness of your environment that makes you like super sensitive of, hey, there's three guys on that side of the bus. Maybe it's time to get off the bus and get an Uber and spend the money, because the danger is like there. And, I saw this, one of the reasons I moved, I mean, this just brings back so many memories. One of the reasons I moved from New York is I remember as a graduate student, both working in Manhattan and taking classes in Manhattan, I used to walk from Upper Manhattan along Madison Avenue until I got to the Brooklyn Bridge. And then I would start riding my bike to Brooklyn because I was commuting. But I liked that walk because I would see all the stores and it was a long walk and it was good exercise. And then it was like, holy shit, man, this city, it's closing up. Every store has the gates down. You can't even see in them anymore. You pass through certain parts of that walk and you feel like you're going to get jumped. And I was a big guy and I had a bicycle. And at one point, I think I was accosted with my bicycle and I was able to ride away. And I thought to myself, hey man, if I can get out. And now the odd part is, 50 years later, whatever it is, since I moved to go to law school so many years ago, California is just as bad, if not worse. I mean, it's really you take your life in your hands. If you walk in the city or ride your bike in the city in the wrong part of town, you're in trouble. I can't say that I've ever felt that way for any part of Florida that I've been in with a bicycle or walking. No. And maybe it's because, there's a lot of people, they give out licenses for concealed carry here. You can have a gun, and there's a lot of people, including women, that get their license. And I have to tell you, I think that these folks know that they might get blown away because Florida has a very strong law that you can defend yourself, including with lethal weapons, if someone decides to push you around. So it's like the Wild West, except on the East Coast. It's like the Wild West here.
Yeah, what's interesting too is that also they are like, you have a feeling when you're there that the citizenry are like behaving themselves, like in Florida. Like people, like we were all over like West Palm, Juno Beach, Fort Lauderdale, Miami, like all over the place. And everywhere you go, people are pretty like they do their thing. And like, there's not a lot of like acting out or like, I just feel like my like Jamie said, he said, you know, cause William, you know, he's a teenager and he's like a feral wild animal because he's been raised in San Francisco and Oakland. And, you know, we're like, don't break anything, don't kick anything, don't, you know what I mean? Like, you know, like how they are like running around the city. Like, I feel like I don't even know. But anyway, so because they'll pick you up and they'll arrest you and put you in jail. Like that would never happen here. So like they don't mess around. Like if you break into a store and you get caught, you're going to jail. Here, there's a law that if you steal anything under $1,000, you're not even considered a criminal. Like they don't even charge you.
Yeah, the felony line in California is $950, so that's the 1,000 marker.
Yeah.
But in Florida, I have to say, if you stole a loaf of bread because you were hungry, you'd probably get charged with felony theft.
Yes.
And you'd probably get like 5 years.
Yeah, if they don't mess around.
It's the point that the 50 different states can each legislate their own policing and their own approaches. And in many ways, as you get older, so I really sort of understand why my parents moved to Florida from New York.
Right. Yeah.
Because they saw New York deteriorating with high taxes, a lot of crime, a lot of stuff was going on that they didn't like.
Yeah.
And they were more Republican, certainly, than I ever was or am or could be. And they were never like liberal about anything because they were little business owners, and they used to have people steal from their business, shoplift from their business. And they saw the New York police do zero about it. They were like, hey, that's no big deal. That's just the way it works. And yet when they got to Florida, they were like, hey, this is like a law-abiding place.
Yes.
And there's not the homelessness, or at least if it exists, I haven't found it yet. It probably does exist within the downtown area because most big cities have this problem. Yes. Particularly if the weather is decent, which it is. Yes. And people will gravitate towards the city services because the cities typically give away a lot to sort of keep people, allow people to have some infrastructure. I mean, look, even the Starbucks had to allow their bathrooms to be open to homelessness because it was just part of what was going on inside of a Starbucks, and it was viewed as discriminatory. And that's the big point to make about this. There's actually a body of public interest lawyers that are bringing cases for the homeless that say there's a right to not be in poverty, which is another way of saying there should be a minimum basic income, which is another way of saying, look, if you want to destroy your life with drugs, we'll give you the money to do it. But you have to live within that budget of whatever the minimum basic income, call it $1,000 a month. So you really should find yourself a place to live, maybe as a roommate somewhere, and then whatever your drug budget allows. Now, there are a lot of people that would say that's a shitty idea because it disincentivizes people to do anything on their own, whether it's drive Uber, drive Lyft, deliver groceries, Instacart. There's a million different ways you can make money in the gig economy these days. But if someone's taking drugs, they're not going to be present-minded enough to do any of those things.
No.
They're living for the next high, whatever that is, and that's called an addiction. And I guess the next step would be we're going to have a lot of addiction centers that are essentially dealing with people that are on the street like it's a societal problem that they exist. And it's not a personal problem anymore.
Did you read about the Cal Psych program?
Is that out of Berkeley?
There was this governor has like a homeless czar. And I guess they've recommended something called Cal Psych. And so where it's like there's 57
counties.
in California. And so because we're so transient, we all need to be on the same page. And then, we offer drug and alcohol and mental health services. And, like they could be in Eureka, they could be in Bakersfield,
Right.
they could be here, they could be there, all over. And so there's a program. And so they had been talking about it. And that's where Michael Schellenberger, this is what I think happened originally, is first of all, he has like a background in the environment, like he was working on climate. And then he took an interest in what was going on because he has like a 16-year-old daughter and he sees how the cities are, so he got passionate about this and he did that study and went to the Netherlands. And then he started working to try to create this California psych and work to help the governors and the mayors like take this on, because we have a $45 billion surplus and, in California this year. And also San Francisco alone, which is under 1 million people, spends $1 billion a year on homeless / drug / infrastructure. And it's
That's
not,
pretty
it's
amazing.
like
That's a pretty amazing statement, right?
Yeah, and it's like they call it like Munchausen by proxy. Like there's a bunch of sick people and then we just keep them sick. Like we don't want them to get well, we don't care. And then we just get all this funding and then we just keep these systems going, but there's no end in sight. And there's these people that fight for people's rights to like stay on drugs. And then there's people that they say that it's about housing. So rather than just giving clean shelter, they want permanent housing, which is basically like it's never happening because the cost in something like San Francisco is $700,000 to $800,000 for one room, to house. And so they say there's like, 19,000 or 15,000 people living on the street in San Francisco. There's 60,000 people living on the street in Los Angeles. In the whole of California, it's upwards to like maybe 150 to 200,000 people living unsheltered in tents, cars, whatever. But then there's a bunch of people in shelters, like people down on their luck and like, have lost whatever, and they have families, they're living in shelters and whatever. But we're talking about people that choose to be or are drug addicts that are able to keep their drug habits going with the money they're making, and then they go into Walgreens, they get a basket of stuff, they go in and they steal, and then there's a place near UN Plaza where they sell all that stuff. And then the city of San Francisco gives them $680 a month plus $288 in food stamps. And you can buy fentanyl, $10 a day, crack, meth, whatever. Like these people are like, they get phones, they give them phones from Verizon. They have a place to charge their thing. They can go have showers. They can do this. It's like, why would you ever go and get sober if that's what you were doing as a drug addict? So with the Cal Psych program is similar to what they did in the Netherlands. They would say, you can't sleep on the streets here. You need to either go to treatment or you need to go home or you need to go somewhere else, but you cannot live on the streets of San Francisco, Oakland, whatever, Marin, anywhere. You have to go. And so, okay, great. You want to go to jail or you want to go to treatment? So, okay, you want to go to treatment? Okay, we have a bed. We have room for you in Eureka in the Cal Psych program. We put you through the program, 30, 60, 90, 120 days. Then after you graduate from that program, then we say, oh my God, great. Now we have this California Forestry Service. So we can put them into, work. They can, have a job. They can do whatever. It's like sticks and carrots. Like you do this, you get this. You do this, you get this. And the program sounds like it would work amazingly, but Gavin Newsom and company do not want to do that because the ACLU and George Soros do not support that. And they want him to be the candidate for 2021 or 2024, 2028. So he does not recognize that we have a drug homeless situation in California. He doesn't have anything on his literature, on his governor's like survey about what Californians are prioritizing. Every single poll talks about homelessness, crime, drug all that is the main thing that everyone's talking about. But the governor doesn't talk about it at all. He just says it's an affordability problem.
Yeah, I think part of what's going on is there's a belief that by keeping the system in the current status quo, the courts will eventually create rulings that the legislature would never create. And then those rulings will instigate some greater liberal agenda, I guess is the right way to put it, that will result in a new socialistic minimum basic income, whatever it is, approach. But I have to tell you, there's so much loss in terms of the numbers you just gave, where you say you have 60,000 homeless, but $1 billion coming in for 60,000 homeless?
No. They spend $1 billion in San Francisco alone.
Right, but there's 60,000 homeless. There's 60,000 homeless in San Francisco.
No, there's only six. No, that's LA. I don't know how much they're spending in LA.
Oh, there's 20,000. There's 20,000 homeless in San Francisco.
Right.
So those numbers are, if you do the math, those numbers are like 50,000 per person. If you do the fast math, 50,000 per person on those 20,000 or less people, that money is not being well used. Let's face it. The problem is multiplying. And so you might as well say to people, hey, do you want $50,000 to like move to sunny Arizona? We'll give you $50,000. The Arizona's got great weather. They've got some lower cost land. Or how about like Nebraska or Kansas? I mean, these people like, why? I kind of like it here. I got all my friends, my drug dealer is here. Like, well, I'm not going to move to a place that's not going to be supportive.
Do you think that a person that's fallen down this deviant cycle, like they have gone from, they have wound up on the street living under, the viaduct of like the freeway in a tent, and are drug addicts. Do you think that they're have the wherewithal to go and get a house and move somewhere? They need treatment. They need help. And so what I'm saying is that rather than, they're not helping them by letting them just continue on. I mean, everybody knows a drug addict or somebody in their family or somebody they've heard of or that said the best thing that ever happened was I got arrested and I had to get clean, or my family threw me out, or some big problem happened, like where they were able to hit bottom and they were able to get some treatment or help. So, it's instead of just spending money on giving them money to go buy drugs and giving them phones and then why don't we focus on trying to help them get well and become participating members, constructive life, not to say, if they don't want to get well, if they don't want to get sober, they don't want to do whatever, then they just need to leave the streets of California. They can't live in a tent. No one is allowed to live in a tent. That used to be against the law, and so. Well,
it probably actually is technically against various laws that aren't getting enforced. The truth is, there is a state law, there is a county law, there is a city law. They all say you can't loiter, you can't do this, you can't do that. But the laws are not being enforced mainly because there's a lot of litigation that raises issues of, are we violating their privacy? Are we violating their autonomy? And I say they as though they're robots or Martians. They're humans, but they're not living in a civil society that we work hard and pay taxes for. And that, by the way, is a big issue, which is more and more people look at their tax dollars being squandered. And then they look at things like, how can a place like Florida operate without a state income tax, but still basically provide roads that are clean and efficient and not potholes and no homelessness or reduced homelessness, not the kind of sewerage that you see. Every time I come to California, I think, God, this place keeps seeming to get dirtier and dirtier. Is anyone cleaning up around here?
No, I know.
Seriously. I mean, Union Square used to be a beautiful place, and I think it is. But fundamentally, if you walk 2 or 3 blocks away, it's a war zone. It's a war zone.
And it's so crazy because it's sad to see, and it feels like there's so much opportunity, and it just feels it feels wrong. Like it feels really wrong. And then the fact that we have to have a conversation to say in little San Francisco, which is like, used to be this little provincial city, like it's not a huge city like a Manhattan or, where you have, 10 million people living in one small area. I mean, San Francisco is less than 1 million people. And you're saying we have to take jujitsu and like carry a gun and, watch out what's going on in San Francisco. I never felt fear living in San Francisco. Like
it shouldn't be. I agree with you. It shouldn't be that way, but I don't have a good other piece of advice because I could tell you my prediction, and we'll mark a calendar. My prediction will be if you're still operating in San Francisco, as I suspect you will be, over the next 10 years, and your son is graduated from college and moved on, probably not in San Francisco. My prediction is it's going to get a lot worse over that 10-year period before it starts getting better. And you're going to say, Jack, we did this podcast 10 years ago. We're all older. Hopefully I've lost more weight. I'm more athletic. Hopefully you've come out to Tampa and visited with your family, including your son and your husband. I can show you what you get. I mean, we bought a house that would have been $20 million in Silicon Valley for a fraction of that price. And it's got 9,000 square feet and just a huge infrastructure that works. And so that, it really does work in a far better way. And I bet these pictures will be far worse, and we'll see the crazy things that people have seen in Portland, where they start to burn down the federal courthouse. And they're going to do stuff that finally someone's going to say, it's not just homelessness, it's a civil war. This is the beginning of a civil war where people who are have-nots by choice and mental illness are going to say, the rich people deserve to pay us. And if they don't pay us, we're going to do street crime. We're going to do shoplifting. We're going to go into Apple stores and just grab everything off the shelf. We're going to break windows. We're going to do looting. And literally, it's going to be like the police saying, we're losing the war. There's too many of them. There's too few of us. And we don't have the facilities or the lawyers or the prosecutors to deal with it. And it's out of control. And then what we're going to see, and this is where there will finally be sort of the bottom of it, the really rich people like Elon Musk are going to move out, which he has already. He sold all of his California properties. Rich people like, for example, the Twitter guy, who I guess is leaving Twitter now that Elon Musk owns it, even though he doesn't live in California, he owns Twitter, which is shocking. Like there was a poll that asked him, well, what could you do with $43 billion? Well, you probably could solve world homelessness and world poverty and world hunger. And they said in the survey, or you could buy Twitter. And interestingly, the people who responded to that survey, 80% said, no, he should buy Twitter. He shouldn't solve those problems. Like those are government problems to solve. They're not for a private individual to solve. Literally, I'll send you that survey. It was like, he's a businessman. He's got $43 billion to invest somewhere. He should buy Twitter and turn it into.
But I think that what would happen exactly to the $47 million? It would go down the toilet, because you see where the $1 billion goes in San Francisco.
That's what he said. That's what he said. He said, if someone shows me a method that I could spend that kind of money successfully, I'm all ears. But
all ears.
I'm all ears, he said. I'm not.
He was supposed to, I read something that they were talking about some hunger thing, then he was going to give $6 billion to someone somewhere, and they had no plan. And he was like, I'm not going to waste it, Right.
Yeah, I mean, to me, if he formed the Musk Foundation, maybe he has it, the Musk Family Foundation, and he said a goal of the foundation, like the Gates Foundation, was to eliminate malaria, still a world problem outside the United States. Okay, what's your goal? Eliminate homelessness.
Yeah.
He'd probably say, that's just too big of a job for a foundation to do. You could be the richest man in the world. You could combine all the rich people in the world together.
But how do you,
You
but
still
how
wouldn't
does
solve
that,
it.
like, yeah, I mean, but think about it. How do you solve homelessness? Because
You would actually probably start with the view that it's going to be started in grade school, and literally you're doing something that says this generation, the generation before it, like basically those generations are gone. They're going to just have to die off. You have to actually start with the view that the educational system at the grammar school level has to fundamentally change so that people bake in what we might call basic ethics, basic self-determination, all the things that, you and I went to better schools.
right.
Like the nuns were tough, but they really did ingrain on this view of you have to take care of yourself. You have to take care of your own health. You have to take care of your own finances. You have to take care of the way you live. You have to take care of hygiene. You have to take care of all these things. But that was grade school. And if you didn't learn that by high school, then you're probably doomed. And there were people that didn't learn it by high school, and they probably are doomed. And the reality is we probably have to just start with the view that the money's got to be spent at K through 8, maybe K through 12. And maybe you have to do it in a way that really improves the school system and says to parents, if you don't have your kids in school, we're going to basically arrest you for child abuse. Like, we're not going to allow you to let the students be truants. We're just not going to allow it. And a lot of this stuff, if you look at what's going on in San Francisco, it's like chain homelessness. Those people in those tents have kids. Those kids are going to be homeless when they become young adults, or they're going to join gangs or do a bunch of other stuff. Maybe that's the way this plays out over time in the next 10 years. Just mark my words, we'll probably spend more money on robots for people on the street than the robots that should be helping the older people kind of live a more comfortable life inside their nursing home or inside their own home. You've given us a good perspective about San Francisco. I hope you come down and visit the next time you're in Florida, or even independently of that. All right, we'll do that.
Thank you so much. Say hi to Lee.
Tune in next time on The Valley Current.